You're listening to another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A deep dive into a classic show whose influence is immeasurable. Your next stop? Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast where I review The Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology series. For archives of all of my episodes, you can visit anthologypod.com. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod and follow me on Twitter at OVAnthologypod. And every episode of this podcast will always be free, but if you'd like to support what I do here, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to exclusive B-roll episodes, TV and book reviews, movie reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and early access to podcast episodes, as well as previously unreleased content. And that covers all podcasts that I do: Obsessive Viewer, Anthology, Tower Junkies. It's kind of a big thing. Patreon has a ton of stuff there for what I think are pretty reasonable monthly payments or monthly pricing. So check that out, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And yeah, welcome to the show. Today on Anthology, I'm going to be discussing Once Upon a Time. It's the 13th episode of the Twilight Zone's third season, and it originally aired on December 15th, 1961. And of course, I'll be rounding out the episode with a brief review of Science Fiction Theater Season 1, Episode 21, Dead Reckoning. And before I get started on this, very excited because I think I mentioned this on the previous episode, but this now, once I finish this episode, once I finish reviewing Once Upon a Time, I will have officially reached the halfway point of the Twilight Zone, the original series, its run on television. So I'm very excited about that. I'm going to do something kind of special for the halfway point episode. I had some ideas in the works, but I think that I'm just going to do one episode and then continue on with the Twilight Zone, because it's been a while since I've really watched the Twilight Zone, and I'm very eager to get to the second half of the series. Yeah, and once I do that, like, the next one up is 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, which I'm very excited about because obviously I've never seen it. So, and that's one of the big ones that really stands out, or is very memeable, or has gone viral, or what have you. So anyway, very excited, and I just want to take this moment to thank you guys for following me along on this little journey and everything. I know it's been very hectic with different hiatuses, or hiatuses, and yeah, I'm just very eager to be back into Anthology and everything. And once again, like, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, if you want to support the show, you can go over there and get some cool content, as well as helping support me and what I do. Okay, so let's get to Once Upon a Time. Let me go ahead and read the plot summary, courtesy of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. Of course, as is customary, I'm going to be spoiling the entirety of this episode, so if you have not seen Once Upon a Time, go check it out, and then come back and listen to it. But consider yourself warned, I'm going to be spoiling the episode right from the jump with this plot summary. So here we go, plot summary, courtesy of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. Woodrow Mulligan, a resident of New York, 1890, is not content with the progress of time. The speed limit has raised to 8 miles an hour, the cost of living is going up, and the noise from the blacksmith and street peddlers. Working under the employment of Professor Gilbert, Mulligan tries on a new invention, a time helmet designed to transport the wearer to another time, but only for 30 minutes. He finds himself whisked to 1962, where the high cost of living is substantially more, and the noise is intolerable. When Mulligan realizes the time helmet is damaged, he goes through a series of comedic efforts with an electronics expert to have the helmet repaired before the 30 minutes expires. He succeeds in his task, returning to 1890, now content with the time period he lives in. As for the scientist from 1961 who traveled back to 1890 with Mulligan, he finds the decade barbaric with few of the conveniences to which he was accustomed. Mulligan uses the helmet to send him back. That is very misleading. That's the plot summary courtesy of the Twilight Zone Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. I think that was a mistake, because it says, as for the scientist from 1961 who traveled back to 1890 with Mulligan, clearly it is a typo because it's supposed to be the scientist from 1890 who traveled back to 1961. And also it says 1962 earlier. Wow, okay. That, yeah, okay. Anyway. I've cleared it up. So, here we go. Talent rundown. Of course, I'm going to talk about the great Buster Keaton as Woodrow Mulligan. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone, and I believe it's the only collaboration he did with anything related to Rod Serling. Obviously, he was a legendary silent era comedian, star of such films as The General, Sherlock Jr., Steamboat Bill Jr., he was a titan of the silent era filmmaking and everything. He was up there with, like Charlie Chaplin and, oh God, why can't I think, Harold Lloyd. And as far as my relationship with, the silent era, I've watched several of Charlie Chaplin's movies. In fact, I think that I know for a fact that The Great Dictator is one of my favorite movies of all time. But I regrettably have not seen any Buster Keaton. So I'm going to have to rectify that for sure. Over on Obsessive Viewer, we do a usually monthly installment episode series where we basically, myself, Tiny, and our friend Ben, we're going through the Roger Ebert's Great Movies list, which Robert Ebert wrote over 300 essays, all about movies that he deemed as great. And so there's almost 400 movies that we are working our way through 3 at a time. Each episode we pick one for all of us to review. So we do three movie reviews in one episode per month, basically. And I know The General is on there. I don't know how much more Buster Keaton is on there, but I'm going to make an effort. The next time we record that, I'm going to make an effort to choose a Buster Keaton movie, because I just haven't seen any of his stuff. So anyway, look forward to that on Obsessive Viewer in the coming months. So, co-starring as Rollo is Stanley Adams. This is his first of 2 Twilight Zone appearances. The next we'll see of him is Mr. Garrity in the Graves in late season 5. And he was also in Requiem for a Heavyweight. And in 1958, he was in Saddle the Wind, which was written by Serling. And in 1963, he also appeared in an episode of Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater called It's Mental Work, which had a teleplay by credit by Rod Serling. It was based on either a script or a story, I don't know. But anyway, Rod Serling wrote the teleplay for it. A couple other notable credits for Mr. Adams are Breakfast at Tiffany's, and also Lilies of the Field, which again, I'll have to plug my Patreon, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I do what's called Patreon Potpourri for the $5 patrons. And on that, earlier this year I reviewed Lilies of the Field, kind of in memory of Sidney Poitier. I also reviewed No Way Out and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, as well as In the Heat of the Night. So kind of 4 reviews of Sidney Poitier performances. So check that out, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And rounding out the cast as the repairman is Jesse White. This is his first of 2 Twilight Zone episodes, with the next being at the end of the season. He is in the episode Cavender is Coming. And as far as other Serling-related works that he appeared in, he was in the Twilight Zone pseudo pilot that I reviewed with Tiny years ago, The Time Element. And he was also in Serling's, I think it was a TV movie, The Yellow Canary, which I believe I reviewed early in the series, or early in the podcast run. And then other notable credits for Jesse White are Harvey and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World in 1963. And so writer for this episode was Richard Matheson, and I believe that he wrote this specifically for Buster Keaton. And this was his 8th of 16 Twilight Zone credits. Previously, we saw his work in The Invaders in Season 2, and next we'll see from him is later this season with Little Girl Lost, which I'm very excited about because one of my favorite Treehouse of Horrors for The Simpsons was a riff on Little Girl Lost. So I'm curious to see how that kind of plays out in the Twilight Zone in its original form. And finally, director for this episode was Norman Z. McLeod. This was his first and only Twilight Zone episode. He directed a lot of comedy in the 30s and 40s, and this was also his only time working with either oh, wow, my voice just cracked so bad, I'm so sorry. This was his only time working with Serling or Buster Keaton, for that matter. At the time, he was in semi-retirement, and this was actually his last directing credit before his health actually took a turn, and he unfortunately died shortly thereafter in 1964. So now that I've had the talent rundown, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the episode. And as is customary, I'm going to start by talking about what I knew before watching Once Upon a Time for the first time. And I had no idea whatsoever. I kind of imagined, based solely on the title of the episode, I imagined that it had something to do with fairy tales, and maybe that it was maybe another story coming to life in the real world episode, or about someone who is transported into a story's world. I had no idea that Buster Keaton was in it, and I had no idea that it had that silent film aesthetic in the first half of the episode. So I was extraordinarily surprised. And let me go into my review for Once Upon a Time. And the first note that I have in my review notes for Once Upon a Time is, whoa. I was not expecting the opening. It was such a treat to see this silent film aesthetic. And I found that so interesting. And we get these old-fashioned title cards that introduce us to Woodrow Mulligan. It says, our hero, Woodrow Mulligan, a disgruntled citizen of Harmony, New York, 1890. And I was just amazed by it. I was just absolutely amazed by it. And then we see the kind of breadcrumbs, the little bits and pieces that kind of establish what a curmudgeon Mulligan is throughout throughout the episode. And we see him not really looking at him looking for negativity in everyday life. And so he's reading the newspaper. The big headline is government surplus only $89 million. So instead of, the national debt or anything, and it's just like it's such a grass is greener kind of thing. If I'm understanding that correctly, government surplus only 89 million. I thought that was very cute. And then he passes by and sees sirloin steaks, 17 cents a pound. and we get the very fun title card that says, what do they think we are, millionaires? Then he also passes by a sign that says ladies' hats, $1.95. And I just love how this just run of sight gags and visual stimuli in the episode establishes just how curmudgeonly Mulligan is. And for such a light and comedic episode, this definitely had this positivity baked into it in terms of the overall message, which I'll kind of, unravel as I go through. This is not a very complex episode. This is not a very... this isn't even really a very big social commentary episode. This is just a very kind of ground level, down to earth episode about this guy who kind of changes his outlook on the world in a very positive way through this extraordinary science fiction experience. And I kind of really enjoy it for that. I really like that. It kind of creates this just enjoyable messaging behind the episode as a whole. And so we see him being just very annoyed by the man playing the trumpet and the blacksmith. And it's clear that he's seeking an escape from the world and a life that he's just so negative toward. And what I find really interesting about this character trait, or this character introduction for Mulligan, is that he finds throughout the course of the episode, he slowly learns that the annoyances of his 1890s life are his own doings, and it's based on his own perception rather than reality. And I love the not cruel twist of fate, but like the kind of fun Twilight Zone aspect. I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but I love the little Twilight Zone aspect where he is transported to a world where he can finally have some peace and quiet. And it is just in the middle of a busy intersection in 1960s with cars honking and very loud construction and stuff. I love that. I absolutely love that as a kind of a fun comedic bit in it. So, so as he's kind of walking across the street and everything, or walking down the street, a cop yells at him from across the street and says, "Hey, Mulligan, curse word. Can't you see that horse and carriage coming?" And so he's about to be hit by the horse and carriage. And I thought at this moment, that he's going to be hit by the horse and wake up in present day / real life. Because I thought maybe at this point, I thought that he was a silent film actor, kind of like, what was the episode? A World of Difference, I think. I always get that episode's title confused with another one in season 1. But I kind of thought that this was going to be he's in a silent film. He's a character in a silent film because of the silent film homages in this opening sequence. And then I thought that he was going to be, he was going to be hit by the horse and then wake up in the present day and in real life. But no, absolutely not. Immediately after I had that thought, he moves out of the way. And I love that you see the cop yelling at him to watch his step, and then Mulligan yells, and then we get the just very delightful title card that's all caps with an exclamation point that just says censored. And I thought that was so much fun. I'll stop here and say this, and this is not meant to be derogatory toward the Twilight Zone, or really, this is not meant to be a criticism of the Twilight Zone as a whole. But I have noticed that in some cases, my memory of the show throughout these years that I've been doing this podcast are that when it tries to do comedy, sometimes it doesn't really land quite as well. And I don't know how much of that is just me watching it in modern day and maybe not connecting with the humor of the 60s, but I don't think that's it, because I kind of want to give myself a little bit more credit than that, but that's certainly a small possibility. But also, I just think that it's a little bit weaker, because I love the Twilight Zone for its social commentary, for its science fiction, for its otherworldly premises and everything. I love it for that. And I kind of feel like when it goes into comedy, it doesn't really work all that well for me. Having said that, I think that the comedy in this episode, so far, we're just now about to get to the opening narration. But at this point in the episode, the comedy is landing so well. It is so great. It is perfect. And I'm really, really enjoying it. And it's bringing me into the episode in such a unique way, something that I haven't seen in the Twilight Zone before, and am willing to bet that nothing like this is going to be in the Twilight Zone going forward. Maybe. I don't know. I'm halfway through the entire series, so who's to say I could put my foot in my mouth with that. But I just really enjoy that. So Mulligan is run off the sidewalk into a pig trough. Yeah, I don't know. By one of those very, very big bicycles with a big wheel on the front and the small wheel on the back. I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's just very indicative of the time. And I love that he yells at the bicyclist and it just says also censored. And again, just really, really fun. Absolutely. Just a blast so far. Absolutely fun. And so I'm going to go ahead and play the opening narration from Rod Serling for Once Upon a Time, and then I will get into my review of the rest of it. So here we go, the opening narration from Rod Serling.
Mr. Mulligan, a rather dour critic of his times, is shortly to discover the import of that old phrase, out of the frying pan into the fire. Said fire burning brightly at all times in the Twilight Zone.
And Serling's performance of this opening narration is kind of a delight. I don't know if maybe it's because it's been a while since I've seen the Twilight Zone, but Serling has this grin in the opening narration that is just so, it is so warm. There's a warmth to that grin, and it's almost like he's winking to us at the idea of them having Buster Keaton in the episode. Maybe I'm kind of projecting with what I know of Buster Keaton's legacy, which is only what I know of his legacy. I haven't seen any of his work, but I just know that he is a prominent figure. And I just kind of feel like that grin on Serling's face is like, yeah, we got Buster Keaton and this is exciting and everything. But either way, if that's the case, if not, if I'm just projecting onto that, it had the makings of it being a very fun episode. And I'm going to spoil the rest of the review and say this was a very fun episode. It did deliver on that. It was a lot of fun. So at this point, the opening narration has been completed, and we now are still in the silent era, which is interesting because I kind of thought that the conceit or the Twilight Zone element, the time travel into 1961 or 1962, I kind of thought that was going to be... I kind of expected the narration to kind of break that apart. I expected the narration to basically... I was expecting the prologue to be Mulligan going into the future, and then the narration would be basically what breaks that up, and then after the narration we get him in the future. But no, we actually have more of the kind of slapstick silent era stuff, and this is where Buster Keaton is able to kind of really shine. And obviously he's done this for decades at this point. So it's very natural, but the slapstick and the kind of physical comedy is just so great. I mean, like, this is the man who famously, like, put himself into harm's way. And I know that Buster Keaton had the, like, house wall fall on him and him go through the window as it fell down. Like, that is bonkers insane. And so to get to see that, someone of that stature in the Twilight Zone doing these like fun slapstick comedy bits is a lot of fun. It's absolutely fun. And so he trips into the closed door and everything. He's going into the basement of Professor Gilbert, who's his employer. And right here, I just checked this off here in my notes. I just said, is this going to be a comedic version of the season 1 episode Execution? And it kind of is, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but it kind of is, and I kind of like it for that. I honestly kind of like it for that. I'll talk more about that as I go through the episode, but it's just an interesting kind of mirror of Execution. Execution was a very interesting episode that follows the same basic plot. It was even so similar that I kind of stopped this episode and I looked to see if Richard Matheson had written Execution as well, but I don't think he did. I can't remember who did that one, but it wasn't Richard Matheson. So we get more slapstick of Mulligan changing and him kind of changing his clothes because he's all wet from falling into the little trough. That's how you pronounce it, trough, yeah. So I like that it's just this bumbling kind of thing. And throughout this entire sequence, in this entire silent era thing, and I'll talk about this in trivia, but the frames are being... The footage is being kind of sped up, or maybe not exactly sped up. I'll talk about this in trivia, of course, but it's definitely being edited in a certain way that gives us this gives it this visual aesthetic of a silent film in like the 20s and 30s, and it's very effective. So as he's walking around, like, this level of filmmaking and editing and everything gives off this impression of him being very confused and very forgetful, and as he keeps finding these things in his pockets, as he's like pressing his pants to hang them up to dry and everything, he just keeps pulling things out of his pockets, and it's fun. It's a fun little bit of comedy. He pulls out a handkerchief and a harmonica, and we get this very cute a kind of like dialogue card that says tweet. And because I'm millennial in 2022, I immediately thought like, I thought of Twitter, obviously, but I thought that it was going to be a bird. And I think that's probably the impression, or that the intention. So you get that little slice of fear that like, he's pressing a bird in this, but it's just a harmonica. And it's fun. I like that. So then he takes out the newspaper from his jacket pocket and presses it. And as someone who is a unapologetic fan of fun wordplay and corny puns, we get the dialogue card that comes up and says "hot off the presses" as he presses the newspaper on the press for his pants. Delightful, just absolutely delightful. I really like that. So at this point, we've gotten our, maybe not our fill of Buster Keaton doing his shtick, but we've got a steady run of comedy bits and physical comedy. And so now we need plot. Professor Gilbert comes in with his time helmet, and we get dialogue cards that goes into detail about it. It gives us all of the exposition we need, and it says it's his time helmet, and put it on and you can visit any year you choose for 30 minutes, only 30 minutes. So right there, we have established that there is time travel in this episode. There is a device that utilizes science to send someone into any year that they choose. There's parameters to where they can only be there for 30 minutes before they're sent back. So right off the bat, we have all of the information we need. And I think that that's really interesting because it's really playing into the concept or the style of this. Like, this is such a clean way to give us all of the information we need to continue enjoying this episode of The Twilight Zone, strictly because it's in that silent era dialogue card thing, aesthetic, that style. And it's such an amazing way to just very concisely give us the information we need. So I really like that. And so Gilbert and his assistant leave, and Mulligan approaches the helmet as I drop my phone. He approaches the helmet and kind of starts, he wants to go to a time where there's peace and quiet. And he puts it on and he turns the dial to 1960. And I thought that was just, it's very charming because, again, this is Buster Keaton doing this kind of physical comedy, just kind of low grade. And there's some really cool visual effects, special effects in this episode where like there's flares and lights on the helmet, and it kind of has like this sparkler kind of effect, but I really like it in addition to, well, yeah, it's just visual because, the sound is just the piano, but I really like just the visual aspect of it because the flares and the lights and everything are coming out of it from all sides, and it's just a very cool effect. And Mulligan freaks out. He runs out and runs through the town in a panic. He holds a chicken, and at this point I'm like, yes, this is the climax of the silent era segment of the episode, and it's perfect. It's great. And then boom, we are brought to 1960s Harmony, New York, in the middle of the street with honking cars. And we have Mulligan standing in the middle of a busy intersection with this crazy helmet on, no pants because he's been pressing his pants. He is holding a chicken in his hands, and he's wearing this ridiculous helmet, and just the look of stupefied disorientation on Buster Keaton's face, like, that is just such a delightful image. Like, it is so much fun, and again, it brings us into the 1960s, into the modern day, without losing any of the comedic timing, any of the comedic tension from the previous segment. And I think that is very much due to the fact that we had that title card, that dialogue card that explained in detail, in concise detail, exactly the parameters. We did not waste any time we did not waste any comedic time giving us the information that we need for the episode. Instead, we are given the information for the episode, and then we are still going full bore Buster Keaton comedy. And it's really effective storytelling. It's really effective writing, and I really like that. And so again, this is very similar to Execution from season 1. There's a cacophony of sound, and there we see just this we see all of the stimuli, all of the stimulus around Mulligan, as we see signs showing the increased prices, the increased speed limits and everything, as we hear these cars going all around him. And again, very similar to Execution, because when I can't remember his name, when the criminal goes into the future in Execution, he is immediately maybe not immediately, I don't remember, but I don't know, he is very much, we have that neon sign, loud noises kind of thing that is just showing the drastically different thing. So it's extraordinarily similar to Execution, and this is not where the similarities end. I'll talk about this later, but there's another scene that's basically a scene from Execution, but reappropriated or a concept that's kind of redone for this episode, and I think that's pretty interesting. So as Mulligan is standing there stupefied, someone drives past him in a truck and grabs his helmet as they pass him. And this confused me for a second, because I thought that it was just someone just grabbing a helmet and just kind of being an ass. But someone grabbed I think the reason that he grabs the helmet is it's by mistake, because I think that he was signaling to turn left at the intersection, and then his hand just got like latched onto the helmet, and then he carried it, because afterwards he's trying to get rid of the helmet and everything, and he tosses it aside, and then we get a kid on a bike, or no, a kid on roller skates takes it and he wears it, and he's like, then Mulligan gives chase. He runs after the kid. There's this whole running bit where Mulligan's chasing the kid, the cop is chasing Mulligan, and then Mulligan steals a bike to go after the kid. And then this part confused me. So there's a guy getting his shoes shined, and he sees it, stops, gets up, stares into the distance, and I don't know if that ever comes into play. If I missed something, please let me know, because I thought that, like, it looked like there was a little bit of like a look of recognition, and I thought like, oh, he's going to recognize that. Maybe he knows someone from the 1890s and he's whatever. But no, he never really does anything. I don't think he ever comes back into the picture. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I guess it does make sense that it's just, it's showing passersby, it's showing bystanders reacting to Mulligan running through the streets, like the crazy image. So it's understandable and everything, but it's a little strange that there's so much screen presence of this guy to have it not come into play into the plot. And so here's where I'm going to kind of pause for a second and just say that I need to look into this, because I don't know how much is like intentionally riffing on this, but all I kept thinking when I was rewatching this was, did Robert Zemeckis and I think Bob Gale, did they take information from this specific episode of The Twilight Zone when they were making Back to the Future? Because this is a Back to the Future scene. Like, this scene was used in Back to the Future. Like, basically, Marty McFly is being chased by Biff, and he like gets like even down to like the kid on roller skates in the movie. It's a kid with this like wooden scooter thing that he breaks off and uses as a skateboard. But it's just, this is very, very, very similar, and I'm just very curious if Zemeckis and Bob Gale and Spielberg and everyone involved with Back to the Future used this as kind of a blueprint of sorts, or use this as inspiration, because obviously it's way too similar to not be intentional. And and I mean, Back to the Future is like one of my favorite movies of all. I'm staring at a Back to the Future poster on my wall. It is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. So I was delighted to see what is presumably an inspiration for it in this episode of the Twilight Zone. So the kid turns down an alley and he drops the helmet and goes away. Mulligan then crashes into Rollo and sits on him when he sees that the helmet is broken. And I love that because that's the first time I think we hear Buster Keaton's voice in this episode. He just says like, "Oh, it's broken," and I don't know, just like he just has this energy to him. He's so good. He's so good. And then we get just quick dialogue saying like he only has 15 minutes to get back. And I really like the time crunch aspect to the story. I really do, because it creates this propulsive sense of drama without sacrificing the zany comedy beats. And I think, I mean, Richard Matheson, man, the writing in this is phenomenal. The economic storytelling is just absolutely incredible. And here's another bit that I really wonder if this episode was like a blueprint for Back to the Future, because Rollo believes him. There's a whole scene where, oh my God, I just made another connection. There's a whole scene where Rollo asks him like, "Oh, who's the president?" And then he's like, I can't remember who he said. Who was the president before him? Oh, it was this guy. Oh, okay. Oh, I believe you. Yes. Oh, great. And again, like in my notes, I love time travel. Like I just love time travel in fiction. It is such a delight. Anytime I see it, it's so much fun. And this is just such a fun use of it, where he asks who the president is, which again makes me wonder, was this episode a blueprint for Back to the Future? Because right off the bat, Doc Brown asks him like, "Oh, okay, who's the president in 1985? Oh, Ronald Reagan, the actor? Great." And then the other connection that I made is I'm going to have to go back and watch Back to the Future again. But, in fact, I just recently moved, by the way, a few months ago, and Back to the Future was the first movie I watched in my new apartment. So to kind of commemorate it with one of my favorite movies. But anyway, the helmet. Because Doc Brown, like when Marty goes back to 1955 and he looks up Doc Brown and he finds his house and he knocks on the door, Doc Brown is wearing a helmet similar to the helmet that Mulligan uses in this episode of the Twilight Zone. I'll have to go back and see, but like right off the bat, like that's nuts to me. It has to be. So yeah. Anyway, then we get. Like, I like how quickly it is that these two characters just kind of, immediately connect and they immediately bond. There's no drama between them or anything. So then, well, no drama. There's some drama, but Mulligan grabs the helmet and runs into Jack's fix-it shop. And the repairman, presumably Jack, tells them that, "Oh yeah, it'll be ready Thursday at 2. And then we get this very, very fun bit where the two men are like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then they're walking out of the shop, and then they both simultaneously stop and turn around and say, "Thursday," in surprise. It's, again, I adore that. I just adore that. There's something so wonderful about that kind of comedy. Like, it is so lighthearted. It is so much fun. And if you commit to it, if you really buy into it, if you really enjoy it, like this will pay dividends in terms of entertainment. It is very, very fun. So then that's the act break. And then after that, we get, again, a just fun little clever turn of phrase. We have Rollo telling Jack, "This man has to get back to 1890. And Jack says, "Then you're in the wrong block. This is only 1600. Which, again, I think is just so much fun. It's a clever turn of phrase. It's a good reprieve from the physical comedy in giving us a verbal or dialogue based comedy beat. Keeps it fresh, keeps the comedy alive. And again, the comedy in this episode is just a lot of fun. It's very fun. And so here's the other connection to Execution from season 1. Mulligan, as Rollo and the repairman are arguing or are talking, Mulligan looks over at a TV thinking that it's a window, very similar to what the criminal did with the TV in the bar. Yeah, because he thought he was in a standoff. Anyway, so Mulligan looks at the television as if it's a window, and then he takes the remote and just presses a button, and the TV turns on. And this is a very fun bit of comedy again, because Mulligan thinks that the man in the TV is talking directly to him, and he says, "Hey, listen to me. That man over there, he doesn't have all of his beans," or something. And then the timing of Mulligan turning away when looking over at Rollo and Jack when the show goes to the opposite shot of the woman is just a fun bit of comedy. And like he turns back and he's like, "That guy doesn't have all of his beans," and he's like, "Okay." And so he goes up to Rollo and he's like, "Hey, what does that mean?" And then he's like, "It's just he's crazy." And then he's like, "Well, that man in the window over there told me that he doesn't have all of his marbles," or whatever. And I just, again, that's a physical, visual joke. And then we get a quick comedic bit where Rollo says, "That's TV." And then he says, "Who's TV?" And I just thought, that's cute. That's fun. Yeah. And so again, it just plays out like a comedy version of Execution, which, surprisingly, I would think like, oh, maybe that's kind of derivative, but it's working for me quite a bit. And I think part of that is because Buster Keaton is so iconic, and getting a chance to, and granted, I'm saying this with an asterisk because I haven't seen any of Buster Keaton's work, but because we have the stature of a Buster Keaton in this episode, it really makes it feel less derivative and more unique because of the talent involved. And so as Rollo and the repairman are arguing, Mulligan inadvertently turns on a vacuum cleaner. He freaks out. And I kind of love the way that Mulligan kicks the vacuum. It's kind of endearing, and he's backing away from it. He's freaked out by it as if it's like an animal. And it kind of reminded me of like, I hope this isn't too reductive or anything, but it kind of reminded me of like a cat or a dog that's afraid of something. It's a vacuum cleaner, so yeah, it's very similar to that kind of thing. But I don't know. So Rollo kind of sits Mulligan down and tells him to sit down and be calm and everything. And so we get another piece of comedy where he sits on the vacuum bag and accidentally turns it on again. And then so he leaves and he tries to buy pants on the street, and the man comes out and he says, "Oh, it's $5, but he says he has no money. So he walks away. He puts the pants back on the hanger and walks away. And at this point, I don't know how far we are in the episode, honestly, but at this part, I will say that the whole shtick was starting to wear a little bit thin for me. But it was kind of offset by the fun bickering between Rollo and Jack. So while Buster Keaton kind of reacting to modern day wore a bit thin, the drama or the energy of Rollo and the repairman arguing was kind of keeping it a little fresh. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, it was wearing a little bit thin, but yeah. So I don't know. But anyway, the cop stops Mulligan, so Mulligan runs back into the fix-it shop and hides behind, runs back to the kind of alleyway. And I loved this. Again, this is a fun visual comedy bit that's predicated on timing and everything. So Mulligan hides behind Rollo as they walk past the cop, and so the cop can't see Mulligan because Mulligan is behind Rollo, and then they walk back with Mulligan in front to pass by him so that they can get the pants and everything. It's really fun. So they walk back to get the pants. Then they get the pants, and then the kind of the effortless way that Rollo just lifts Mulligan up so that he can put the pants on while still in front of him and not being detected by the cop is just a very nice touch. It's a lot of fun. And so on the way back, they pay the manager of the clothing store, and they're all set. So at this point, they go back in. The time helmet is fixed, and Rollo talks about how much he loves the 1890s. And this feels a little bit sudden. It doesn't really track for me, but I'm not going to really think too hard about it. But just like the sudden aspect, like I don't feel like we really saw anything of Rollo in this episode to really show his disdain or show his disappointment with the 1960s. So this all kind of comes about very, very suddenly. So anyway, so he talks about how much he likes the time period and says that there's no income tax, which is cute. And then he then puts on the helmet to be sent back in time. And this is kind of cruel and mean, but he's like, he tells like Mulligan's like, no, I've got to get back. And Rollo's like, well, no, I'm a respected scientist. You're just a janitor. You're unimportant. So I'm going to go back in time and be important. And then Mulligan tries to explain like, oh no, we can go back together because I brought a chicken back with me. So that it'll work if we just hold on to each other. And Rollo doesn't believe him here. And again, it's kind of stretching my suspension of disbelief a little bit, because Rollo was so quick to believe Mulligan had traveled into the future that like this just feels a little bit shaky. Like I said, this whole element where Rollo has the helmet and is going to go back in time and leave Mulligan in the present just feels very just sudden. It feels very sudden and unearned for me. So there's another chase scene that mirrors the beginning chase scene, but this time Mulligan is chasing Rollo, and he there's this really funny part where he actually tries to push a truck to get it to move, which I thought was pretty funny. And then in the last minute, the same spot in the street, Rollo has the helmet and he says, 1890, here I come. Right at the last second, Mulligan jumps over the truck and grabs Rollo right in time, and they both go back to 1890. And now we get the return of the silent era style, and we get basically the denouement, or the resolution of the episode. So we get back to the silent era style, and they actually landed on Officer Flanagan from the beginning of the episode, which I thought was pretty fun. And Mulligan actually kisses him and says, Officer Flanagan, you're a sight for sore eyes. Again, we have the title card, or the dialogue card. And Rollo has this look of glee on his face, which I kind of appreciate. I thought that was charming. It was a good way to kind of show that he isn't a villain. He was just taking an opportunity to go to change his life. And in fact, it's kind of just like the same situation that Mulligan had at the beginning of the episode. Rollo saw a situation in which he could go to a time that better suited him. And so he took that opportunity, same as Mulligan seeing an opportunity to go to a time that better suited him, took that opportunity as well. So I don't know. I can reconcile the change in Rollo in these few moments with that like look of glee that he has. So it does kind of track a little bit. It did still come out of nowhere, but it does track a little bit. So anyway, we get a title card saying 1 week later, and we see a happy and contented Mulligan as I believe it's on the title card as well. And it's an inverse of the beginning. He's no longer a curmudgeon. He sees the sign saying steaks 17 cents a pound, and he says, "Hey, how can they sell it so cheap?" So it's very charming. It's a good closing of his character arc and everything. It's very charming. That's the best I can use to describe it. It's a very charming moment. And so Mulligan goes back to the basement and blows on the harmonica. This time, he's just enjoying it. And now he greets Rollo, and now we see that Rollo is the curmudgeon now. And because it's so short-sighted of him, and I kind of love it a little bit. He's the curmudgeon. He is whining about his laboratory, saying that there's no electronic equipment, no transistor parts, no ultrasonic cathodes, no spring mattresses, air foam pillows, or electric blankets. He is miserable. And I found that to be really, really funny. And in keeping with the overall tone of this episode, Mulligan puts the time helmet onto Rollo and sends him back to 1960. So while other episodes of The Twilight Zone would have capitalized on the cruelty, like if this was a Charles Beaumont episode, it would have capitalized on like, oh, Rollo got his just desserts. He's back in time and he can't do anything. It's this cruel twist of fate and everything. But no, Mulligan is willing to help him. So he puts the time helmet on, sends him back to 1960, and the episode ends. And it's just very, I don't know, very charming, and it's in keeping with the overall comedic tone of the episode. So with that, we get Rod Serling's closing narration, which I will play right now.
To each his own. So goes another old phrase to which Mr. Woodrow Mulligan would heartily subscribe. For he has learned definitely the hard way that there is much wisdom in a third old phrase which goes as follows: stay in your own backyard. To which it might be added, and if possible, assist others to stay in theirs, via, of course, The Twilight Zone.
So overall, Once Upon a Time is a super fun and funny episode that I just love the way it pays homage to the silent era and pays homage to Buster Keaton as well. And it was a very nice and pleasant spin on the be careful what you wish for motif, and the way that it plays out is very charming, really, is the best word I can use to describe it. It's just a very, very fun, lighthearted episode, and I really enjoyed it, and I love the homages to classic comedy, and it just feels like they brought their A game with the comedy because of the stature of Buster Keaton and the homage to the silent era. So I have a couple of pieces of trivia before I wrap up this review, but first of all, first, my piece of trivia for the first piece of trivia is Buster Keaton was obviously one of the biggest stars of the silent era, and this entire episode was intended as an homage to that work. And it was, like I said, Richard Matheson wrote it specifically for him, I believe. And then the other piece of trivia that I find really interesting is that the choice to make the 1890 section in the style of a silent film wasn't made until a rough cut of the episode was viewed. So they filmed it with like dialogue. They wrote it and filmed it as a conventional episode introduction, and they had dialogue and everything. But when they got a rough cut of the episode, they re-edited it with dialogue title cards and a piano soundtrack, and also in order to make it feel like more like that silent era projection. The editors removed a frame here and there in each scene to give the scenes a sense of that jumpiness from the silent era. And I just found that to be really interesting, that this choice that bears such a big piece of import to the comedy and the homage of this episode. I'm so surprised that it was a decision made so late in production. Like, it has all the makings of being a conceptual choice from pre-production, from writing. So I was very surprised to find that information. And in fact, that's why Rod Serling's opening narration kind of feels like a little bit tacked on or kind of out of place, because they didn't know that they were going to do that silent era thing until it was being edited and everything. And I find that to be really interesting. Yeah, and I mean, it worked incredibly well. I'm so glad that they did that, because it just really, really brought me into the episode in such a big way. Yeah, so I don't know who is responsible for making that decision or who thought that up, but man, that it worked like gangbusters. It really elevated the episode for me. And overall, I will say, yeah, like I said, this was a fun episode of The Twilight Zone. I'm glad that I'm now halfway through the show, and I'm eager to see what the back half has to offer. But before I go, I'm going to, of course, go ahead and do a bonus review of an episode of Science Fiction Theater Season 1, Episode 21, titled Dead Reckoning, which I believe is available to watch online. There's a link in the show notes of this episode and in last week's episode. So you can go check that out and then come back and check out this review. I'm not going to spoil the episode, but yeah, fair warning. There's the link and everything. So I'm going to go into my review of Dead Reckoning. So, Dead Reckoning originally aired on September 17th, 1955, and the synopsis, according to IMDb, is trouble befalls an Air Force flight crew and their passengers, a meteorologist and his beautiful assistant en route to the Arctic. This episode was directed by Robert L. Strock and written by Gene Levitt. It stars James Craig, Steve Brody, and Arlene Whalen. And, so, as is customary, at the beginning of the episode, there's a pre-show introduction by host Truman Bradley, where he does something, he kind of ties the story into a scientific method or scientific, experiment, and in this one, he's playing with magnets. He puts a magnet on a magnetic coal, or puts a piece of metal on a magnetic coal, and he talks about the mystery of magnetic force, and then he, brings us into the episode, and yeah, this was pretty solid. This is, again, it's not my favorite episode of the season. It's not my favorite. It didn't really blow my hair back or anything, but basically it's about a volcano that's erupting with an Air Force base nearby. So Air Force pilots are prepping for a secret mission to go to the Arctic island for some reason. I don't know exactly what the purpose of the flight was. But they are taking the scientist and his assistant to the island, or to the Arctic, so that they can kind of, I guess the purpose of it was so that they can evaluate it and see if the Air Force base can be salvaged. I don't know. So there was a fun bit of comedy in this episode where a guy, one of the Air Force people, was talking about sunspots. And they were talking about how, like, oh yes, I think they were referring to it, like, they were referring to it as sunspots, but I think what they were talking about was like solar flares. And they were like, yeah, sunspots can cause great destruction on Earth and everything, and maybe that's what's causing the volcano to erupt. And then another guy says that he says, oh yeah, I've got an uncle who knows all about sunspots, and he names a bunch of beaches. Like he's like, yeah, Fort Lauderdale and other beaches. I don't know, other places with beaches. So I thought that was a fun bit of comic relief in the episode. So the actual meat of the episode, it takes place on this plane that's being flown to the Arctic, and there's trouble. Instruments stop working due to this electrical storm that's nearby. And the thing that I really appreciate about this, or the thing that I liked, is the thing I like about all of these episodes I've reviewed, where it shows them working out the problem. It shows them working out scientifically, like, how to solve this problem, what's causing it, how they can how they can work through it, which is great. And also, this episode, even though I said that it's not really my favorite episode or anything, it is an episode that does have some things going for it. It has that working out the problem aspect to it. It has this very interesting minimalistic set with the cockpit and the plane. And it's pretty clever. Like, they do some science stuff to make like a makeshift altimeter and everything. So there's some interesting stuff there. But what I kind of appreciate about it was the time element, the time aspect of it, where they're like, okay, well, yeah, this is a life or death situation. This is potentially life or death. Our instruments are not working. We are flying blind, and we need to science our way out of it. And what I really like about that is that this is a little bit different than other episodes in that they have to, like, it is a time sensitive thing. It is something that, like, they are in potentially deadly trouble if they don't work out what is going on. And I really liked that. I thought that that added a bit of suspense to it that's different from previous episodes where the suspense was kind of born from like other characters and kind of situational tension that kind of felt a little manufactured. The plot of this episode definitely has this propulsive energy, this propulsive tension that does have this very much time sensitive threat to the characters. And I won't give away what happens, but I did enjoy it. I thought it was fine. It's kind of middle of the road. It's not really that all that great, really, but it was a pleasant episode, and I do recommend checking it out online and everything. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say about Dead Reckoning. Yeah, I mean, it was solid. It was cool. So that's my very brief review of Dead Reckoning from Science Fiction Theater's first season, and that'll do it for this episode of Anthology, guys. Before I go, I just want to say once again, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where I'm posting frequent updates, frequent audio content. So if you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it, and you also get some free content or content that you pay for. $1 per month gets you access to B-roll recordings. That's just kind of like general conversations and stuff, and some other fun goodies. And then $2 gets you a bunch of stuff. Like I've been doing a review series on Stephen King's short fiction collections. So I have about 6 hours worth of audio about me talking about his collection Night Shift from the 70s. And then I have another 6 hours worth of audio of me talking about each individual story in Skeleton Crew, Stephen King's 1980s short story collection. And then and I also have movie reviews, TV episode reviews. I've been doing Stranger Things season 4. I've been doing a bunch of Marvel shows. I just finished Hawkeye, and I'm going to be doing Severance here soon on Apple TV Plus. I also did Foundation on Apple TV Plus and Chapelwaite on Epic. So there's a ton of stuff there. $5 also gets you commentary tracks, and some Patreon potpourri stuff, and then $10 gets you all of that plus early access to content and unreleased content. So anyway, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer if you're interested in supporting what I do here and getting some exclusive audio content. That's it. Next time on the podcast, I'm going to be doing a special halfway through the Twilight Zone episode, kind of going through all of the stuff I've learned in this first half of the Twilight Zone. So without further ado, I just want to say thank you guys once again for listening and for supporting me in any way that you do. So I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad to be back, and I will see you guys next time for Halfway Through the Twilight Zone. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next episode. And now, here's a short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. To hear the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. All right, and I am back. I just got out of the theater from the Investor Connect screening of The Black Phone. And, oh man, okay, first of all, my initial reaction, my immediate thought coming out of that movie is I really need to watch Scott Derrickson's other movies. I need to watch Sinister. I need to watch Sinister 2, which I think he did. I still haven't confirmed that or not. But I need to see those because this guy is really good. This movie was really, really impressive. I'll probably rate it 4 stars. And it has this just tension throughout it. Ethan Hawke's performance is bone-chilling. It's mostly, he has that creepy mask on that's in the trailers and everything. He has different variations of it, and he's so intimidating and creepy, and he plays up this completely insane, murderous person. He plays this person so well, and so...
This podcast was edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find links to all of our shows at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcasts. For exclusive bonus content, including reviews, commentaries, and B-roll episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.